Good afternoon, everyone. I am Reggie Turner. I have served on the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture since 2017. The uniqueness is I am the first commissioner in the 50-plus year history of the commission to serve from Washington County. And decades from now, when the story is told, it will be said that the impact that the commission has had on the African American community in Washington County and Hagerstown was changed when we had the opportunity to have access to Annapolis and all the wonderful people that I serve with. Of all the speakers that you will hear from, I am the most unqualified, but God. My journey in regards to the commission has been unique. I am not a historian, I'm not an archivist, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm not a genealogist. I am a financial advisor by trade. I've been a financial advisor for 23 years. So for me, I always look at things through a financial and economic development landscape. And what I have found is my niche of crafting that message to be able to help move community forward. Because in this period of time of work that we've been doing in Hagerstown to preserve our history, at the same time, we have been taking down Confederate monuments all over the country. So while I'm advocating for preservation of our history to our mainly white politicians, that's a tough sell when they're upset about kind of the other side of the coin. But being able to talk through things through an economic lens and the win for us all as a people, but the bottom line is improving the conditions for us as a people. So as a financial advisor, one thing that you will always hear me preach about is the wealth gap. There's a tenfold wealth gap between white Americans and us. And in my life, I've seen what that wealth gap is, from quality of life of people in my family, from the stress that will cause to other family members and how it would affect their health and well-being, the fracture of families, the quality of health care we receive, the ability to take care of our elders when we get older. All the little things that we all have individually seen in our family, you can look at the wealth gap as something that affects those type of things. So one of the things I've committed to as a financial advisor, even though in my practice, 90% of my clients don't look like me, I'm committed to using my time, talent, and treasure to affecting people that look like me so that they can become my clients of the future. So I'm going to take some time and kind of share my story. This log cabin that you're seeing is in the historic Johnson Street community. This is in the heart of Hagerstown. The African American community there started to form in the early 1800s. Through that period of time, even up until the Civil War, it was a community where free and enslaved African Americans lived amongst each other, sometimes even within the same families. But the unique thing about this community is that it is so tied to the rich history throughout the state and nationally, where Frederick Douglass came to this community in 1879. The AME Church was founded there only 4 years after the original AME Church was founded. And one of the signatories on the AME Church in this community was Richard Allen. Much of this community's story was told in the Afro-American because it had that connection. So you wouldn't find a lot in the local newspapers, but you would find that information in the Afro-American. And we have wonderful advocates in our community that have helped us in regards to our research. The other thing that I'm passionate about is that there are no professional African-American historians to tell our story. So, and what I found is many times that when white historians get to the tough part of the story, they're hesitant in regards to telling it. And the ones that do tell it, they don't tell it properly. So we need more of us to tell our own stories. So even though I'm not a historian, I kind of stand in the gap to keep the story going until our community has the resources to be able to do that type of thing. But this cabin here was owned by an older gentleman in the community. He was in his 90s. It was covered in siding, and one night, 3 years ago, a police officer came speeding down Jonathan Street in the opposite direction and hit his home. He was displaced from that home. And through that process, when this house was to be demolished and the siding was taken off, the world then knew that it was a log cabin. No one knew the extent or the age of this log cabin, but we were embarking upon work to save the historic structures in this community, and that gave the opening for us to come in and do some amazing things. If you want to go to the next slide. I'm sure it's not seen very clearly here. This is a Sanborn map from 1887. The Jonathan Street community is kind of in quadrants 4 and 5, moving up. So it's not a very large community. It's a community that's about 2 blocks by 4 blocks. This community then became, redlined, and it has lacked resources for a long period of time. But in this time period, there was this renaissance happening in that community. During Reconstruction and after, black businesses were being built. Institutions and organizations were coming about. The education of black children was known to be exceptional at that point in time. But over time, those things were stripped away from that community. Next slide. One of the unique things I found when I started on this journey, the city of Hagerstown has 4 historic districts that were all named in the 1980s. But strangely enough, the Jonathan Street community was excluded. So they have lost many of their historic structures over the years because they have not had the protections that the rest of the community has had in regards to preserving their history. And part of my plight was going to our city to say, none of you were serving when these things were happening, but in the institution of which you serve, these things were done to this community purposefully. And it is your responsibility as a body to start to address those things. Next one, Commissioner Green. So one of the unique things about Hagerstown, in this small community, there was 2 Green Book sites. There was Ship's Tea Room and there was the Harmon Hotel. The Harmon Hotel was owned by Walter Harmon, who was known to be the most affluent African American in the community. When Willie Mays played baseball, some of you may have heard the story, Willie Mays stayed at this hotel because he could not stay with his white teammates. But his teammates snuck through the window and spent the night with him, and then got up early in the morning and left. Part of the plight is, this hotel, had a bowling alley and entertainment. So if you were going to All Points North in this day, even through the 1950s, you were staying at this hotel. And today, that hotel doesn't exist. It's been demolished. So one of the other points that I make as a financial advisor is you will not find any 50, 75, 100-year-old businesses in our community. So that speaks to the stripping of the generational wealth that should have been passed down, that would have helped this community sustain itself, that is no longer there. Next. And that's a little bit more of the Green Book history. You can go to the next one, Commissioner Green. So this journey started with actually trying to save this home. This home is 335 North Jonathan Street. The significance of it, it was the home of the Moxley Band. The Moxley Band was a band of 3 brothers, 2 enslaved, 1 free, and 9 other members. They started performing in the 1850s, and then they joined the U.S. colored troops. And all the band members that were enslaved gained their freedom through joining the U.S. colored troops. They performed from Maryland all the way down to Galveston, Texas, and then they came back to the Jonathan Street community and they performed. So if there was fundraisers or different things that were going on for the benefit of community, they were always a part of that in entertainment. And one of the unique things in regards to the history that we felt in the Afro-American is the Moxley Band let in Frederick Douglass when he came to speak in Hagerstown. That was one of the things that we were able to find in the Afro-American in regards to this history. We were seeking to save that home. However, when we were able to get an architect or someone to come in and look at it, we saw that it was too far gone. But that process allowed us to work through and save the log cabin. So if I can say anything, many times your success will come in your failures that come before it. Because if we wouldn't have embarked upon that journey, if my community didn't get to know that I served on the statewide commission and the access to resources, much of this would have never been able to take place. Commissioner Green, see if you can hit that and see if this video will play. And let me just tee this up. This is me going in front of City Council when I was making my initial plea to them. Commissioner Green joined me, and also Executive Director Chanel Compton were there, because I needed the commissioners to understand how we were treated in our community. I needed people from around the state to see how we were treated in Western Maryland. But the one thing that came out of this, and what I will encourage you, when you have the opportunity to speak in front of government, whether it is at some panel discussion, during the legislative session, city council, have a prepared statement. Because that statement will stand the test of times because it is documented. So the one thing that I knew is I didn't know that if I would be successful, but there's going to be a historical marker of what we talked about and what we were trying to accomplish here. And if it's not me, then whomever picks up the mantle later will have this to move with. And while we're having a little difficulty, if anyone has any questions for me in regards to what we covered now, I surely can take an opportunity to answer.
Can I ask, you said that it was important for the other commissioners to see how you were treated in the community. Can you clarify a little bit for me? How were you treated? What was it that you needed them to see?
Well, leading up into this meeting, I had made contact with Maryland Historical Trust in regards to the issues that we were dealing with. And the representative that was helping us in our community was explaining that if this home was up to be demolished, Reggie, you're kind of late in the game. And a lot of the legal things that could be put forth, you don't have time for. So you're gonna have to make a public fuss. You're gonna have to make a public outcry. In the midst of that public outcry, I was accused of grandstanding. I was accused of, I was trying to make a name for myself for the next political election, that, that was my way of running for office. I was attacked personally, I was attacked professionally. And I'm okay, I have broad shoulders, I could deal with all that. But it was important for my colleagues to see how different our community is, how African Americans are treated, and also Our community is not used to having African Americans that serve at a state level. You know, Washington County and many of the counties in Western Maryland are gatekeepers. Normally, if there is an issue that rises in the community, they can squelch the argument. You know, if you have an issue with city council, they'll call you into a meeting. They'll bring you in and give you some attention and figure out what they can do for you to silence you. But it was a situation where there was nothing that they could do for me because there was nothing that I personally wanted. I just wanted to see my community being treated better.
I'm sorry if that was a sensitive question.
No, not at all. Not at all. I say it loud and I say it often. And the thing that I have learned since joining the commission, having a relationship with Governor Hogan and his staff and his office, the biggest thing that has allowed us to affect change is to get our community story outside of it. So when I get an opportunity to come share this with you, I'm going to do it because I know it furthers the work. So the next time you're thinking about Washington County or Hagerstown, you're gonna, let me ask such and such a question. Like, what do they see? What's going on? And the more critical eyes are on a community, local governments and those in power can't squelch the conversation. Yes, yes. That log cabin has become a national story. So yes, I would have hoped you would have seen it. If you ladies just need me to just wing it without the presentation, I can. Okay. 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 Not a problem. So the clip that you were going to see from the city council meeting was me setting the stage in regards to what had traditionally happened in this community, right? It has been disinvested in, it had been redlined, drugs were filtered in this community, homes were broken up by the locking up of black men during the crack epidemic. You know, you had all of these things happening within this community, but in going before that city council, I was saying to them, you've given us 3 weeks to come up with a solution for over 50 years worth of problems. And I wanted to get that on the record because, you know, another thing is that one of the other things I learned in my community is that so many people don't know what redlining is. Us as a people don't know, but obviously those that are in power don't know because some of them just see it, well, that's just the way it was. No, these were practices by the government. These were practices by the institution that you are now a part of. So I wanted to set the stage for that. So if nothing else, if in my conversation and dialogue with the council and the mayor, you know, they shut me down or said thank you for your time and had me leave, I had a statement on the record from the beginning that was going to stand. And the beauty of that statement is that I have, you know, friends and colleagues and members of our team that are tech savvy, so they were able to go cut that. And now we've used it as marketing. So when we're talking to people around the state or around the nation in regards to what we're doing, we can go back and use that as marketing to talk about these are the issues that we're working on and what we're trying to work towards. This was the type of response that we were getting from that government. But to tell the story in regards to the log cabin, so the home that I showed you was eventually demolished. We conceded on that. And the one thing in regards to capacity building that we did to help us is that we started to partner with Preservation Maryland. Preservation Maryland is a 90-plus-year-old preservation organization. Through some connections in my community, I reached out to them. I reached out to their executive director. I said, we have something unique in our community, but we need help. And then from there, they were able to kind of bring in some expertise to come in to look at some of these historic structures in the community. So when the architect came to see the home that I showed you, we also got permission from the homeowner to go see the log cabin. And what we found out in that period is that the architect says this has good bones and it can be saved. So from there it became a negotiation with the homeowner because he was elderly in his 90s. The city wanted it demolished. They had given him money to demolish it. They wanted this headache to go away. We were trying to negotiate with him to say, give us an opportunity to save it. And it was a kind of, well, who are you and where did you come from? And everyone's impugning my motives. But the meeting with the commission there and the subsequent article in the newspaper of understanding what the commission does and what it stood for gave us the ability to build a relationship with him for him to give us an opportunity to save the cabin. Now, this part is not scientific. This is just kind of life experience. I am not traditional. I'm not from Hagerstown. I've been there about 30 years. They still have not adopted me yet. And when I first started making noise, everybody was on board. But when I started getting attention and making progress, then all of a sudden I wasn't from here. And then my motives were impugned. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies in regards to that. But that didn't deter me. There were some nights I went home and I said, I'm going to put this down and just enjoy my children, but I didn't. I prayed, I dusted myself off, and I went back to it. But navigating community relationships is difficult in this. And that's one thing that I would say you have to be cognizant of. And when you work with other institutions that are bringing resources, you have to make sure that relationship is buttoned up. Because even in working with an established nonprofit, what they're trying to deliver for their organization and their board may not be what you're trying to deliver for your community. And you need to have clear dialogue in regards to how things are engaged. Because there were many instances where organizations that we work with that they were trying to be very careful in regards to crafting their message in regards to the city and governments because they needed to work with them in other capacities. And it would be situations where they would go in front of the mayor and council but wouldn't recognize us, wouldn't say us by name. But what it would do is it would undermine our mission. So these are the type of things that are nuanced that you have to figure out when you bring in partners to help you, especially when you bring in those partners that don't look like you. So what we did in this process, we started an organization called the Western Maryland Community Development Corporation. Because in the beginning, it was just myself and Terrence Moore. I'm a country boy from Appomattox, Virginia. He's a New York City kid, but we both have a love of finance. And if you get us both in the room, we're gonna tell the story from different angles, but we're gonna meet in the middle. And it's been an amazing relationship. But early on in this process, people say, oh, Terrence and Reggie, Reggie and Terrence and Reggie. So we needed to have an organization. So we started an organization. We brought on 3 other community members that had more roots in the community, had diverse skill sets, and we came together to form this organization. But the key thing that we understood early on, with the level of distrust that a lot of times that we have amongst one another, is that we could not touch anybody's money. So the relationship that we had with Preservation Maryland at the time, we asked for them to be our fiscal sponsor so that no money went through our organization. So as you hear this story, understand this. To date, we have advocated for and brought in over $2.5 million to this community. And we have requests in the governor's budget and more for another $3 to $4 million. Last legislative session, I went directly to Governor Hogan with the plea for this community. My ask was for $10 million, only got $400,000. But none of the money has crossed our hands because we wanted to eliminate that barrier in our community of distrust and that crabs in the barrel mentality of you're getting it and we're not. We wanted to separate that so that if you truly are paying attention to the work, you know that everything is going to the community. So we stood up this organization. And the first money that we received was $250,000 at the end of session in the first year of COVID. And we have Preservation Maryland as our fiscal sponsor for that. And that is the money that kicked off the log cabin project. The blessing that came is that this is happening in the midst of COVID, when most organizations are not doing anything, and the news stories were bleak, and we're dealing with George Floyd, and every company is coming out with their social justice statement and what they're going to do and what dollars they're going to put behind it. Well, we're standing up something in the community as they're saying that we can hold their feet to the fire for. And Preservation Maryland was able to bring in and partner us with the State Highway Administration. For those of you that don't know, the State Highway Administration has an archaeological department. If you've seen on the news when the finding of Harriet Tubman's father's home recently, the chief archaeologist, Dr. Julie Shablisky, heads that team. We had an archaeological dig on the site of that log cabin. And that was kind of the spearhead of this kind of changing. From there have been a few Baltimore Sun articles, Washington Post, Smithsonian Magazine, several Baltimore television stations have come to Hagerstown to interview, and that was the goal, to get the story outside of Hagerstown. But that all started with the impact of the commission and the access, the resources to be able to do that. From that archaeological dig, Maryland Public Television came in and shot a mini documentary. Also, we had our local community college, Hagerstown Community College, partner with the National Endowment of Humanities. They received a grant and another mini documentary they produced on this. Also, our Fine Arts Museum had an exhibit running for about 4 months that documented this whole process and the history of this community. And the amazing thing about that is the Fine Arts Museum in Washington County or in Hagerstown is a treasure, but many African Americans have never been there. And the proud thing was the first time they went there, they saw a representation of themselves in a manner that which they had never seen before, and that their community celebrated. So this log cabin kicked off so many ancillary projects and things. Right now there's a long-form documentary that's scheduled to come out next year in regards to this work in this project. It's been spearheaded by Three Roads Communication out of Frederick, Maryland, that has done some other award-winning work. And now that log cabin, I wish I could show you, it has been totally rehabbed now. It has modern amenities in it, and it has been sold. There's a young couple living in this home now. Obviously, we could not control who gained ownership of the home, right? Because that's one of the things we've been fighting against, right? We've been fighting against that. But the context of Hagerstown, of what you need to understand is the city of Hagerstown has a 25% poverty rate. The city of Hagerstown in general has about a 40% home ownership rate. The Jonathan Street community has a 14% home ownership rate. So you can imagine what this community looks like without homeowners there that take pride in their property. The other thing is, when I was showing you the map earlier in regards to the 1800s, through that period, around 1905, there was about 15 to 16 businesses in this community. By the time we got to the height of the Civil Rights Act, there were 60 businesses in that community. Today, there's 0. That community has been rezoned to be only residential, so an entrepreneur or a hairdresser or a barber or whomever can, or a corner store could not come in that community if they wanted to. So part of our fight is to return home ownership, to have the city reevaluate their zoning, to be able to bring back businesses within that community to strengthen it. And then the third thing that we're working on is that the Black Community Center there is kind of the nucleus of that community, and it has been since 1888 when it was built. That was one of the first Black schools in that community. and then it became the Black YMCA when that community was segregated, and then it became the Robert W. Johnson Community Center, named after a Tuskegee Airman that was a teacher at the local schools and then also taught at that community center. And what we see is that community center is the vehicle to drive resources, whether it's for children in summer youth programs, financial literacy for families, cooking, food drives, family wellness. All of these things can be drove through that community center. But it was built in 1888, and the back of it was built in 1924, and it has been falling apart. And it's been under-resourced. This community center has a Olympic-sized swimming pool that the city of Hagerstown gave to the black community to keep them out of their pool in the 1950s. But there was never really any plan to invest in it. So think of this. All the black businesses start to separate. So the black wealth is dying off. So there's no money from the affluent blacks because they are leaving and going to other areas to contribute back to the community so it sustains itself. So the goal that we've been working on is to rebuild that. I don't believe we have to reinvent the wheel because there's a path that the ancestors have showed us of how they made that community thrive. And my feeling is with the advent of social media and the way that we can disseminate information that we're in a great position to do that. And the investments that are being infused in this community, the first thing that's being done is to revitalize that community center. We were able to receive an assessment for it where the cost to totally rehab that community center is about $3.2 million. We have about $1.1 million, and we have something on the governor's desk for another $2 million to cover that gap. So when you talk about capacity building, partnering with organizations around the state that can help move your mission forward, like this commission. Find your commissioners that are in your county, or not even in your county, but find commissioners that can come stand with you. Find, your local politicians that will work with you. I have found that our relationship with the Black Caucus is influential. One of the things about my community that many people didn't understand when I started on this journey, Senator Joanne Benson from Prince George's County is from Hagerstown. She actually went to school at the Robert W. Johnson Community Center. So this is hugely important to her. And she is one of the fiercest advocates for this in Annapolis. And she has mentored me and helped me navigate the landmines of the politics that move all the way up to Congress that runs through our communities of trying to squelch the black voice. And the way that, I'm loud enough, right? One of the ways that the wealth gap hurts our community is the disparity between the have and the have-nots. And what politicians and those in power love to do, they love to go to the have-nots and spread disinformation to think that something is being taken from them, and it's being taken from them by someone that looks like them. And that type of conquer and divide has been happening in our community forever. I've been experiencing it. Another resource in this room is the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. Dr. Hunt, I served on the Western Maryland Advisory Council, and as we were dealing with these issues with the city, we submitted information and documentation to them to tell them what we were dealing with. And the commission itself decided to write a letter to the city, letting them know that they supported what we were doing, and we hoped that they would as well. But it's another part of getting more eyes outside of your community on what is happening in your community. If there's opportunities for you to go to Annapolis, I know everyone's county normally goes to Annapolis, at some point during the session. Go create relationships, talk about what you're doing. It's important to have a business plan. it's important to have a deck where you can just kind of give someone the highlights of what you're doing, whether it's a presentation like me coming here, or I can hand someone a hard copy when I go. But those things lend itself to building capacity. Now, the challenge for us now, because all of us are men in our 40s in regards to the Western Maryland CDC, we realize the gap is we need young black men and women to understand what we're doing now. We can't wait until we get to what we consider the finish line. We have to start to reach out to them now so that they understand, because life is unpredictable. We don't know how long we're going to be here and how it can be disruptive. So we're talking about succession planning. We always look at this work as if we don't get another day to do it in regards to how we move forward. But the thing that I can say about the state of Maryland, there's a wealth of resources throughout the state. This commission can help you, direct you to many of them. Many of the commissioners have vast experience way beyond anything that I have shared with you today. But those are things that can help build your capacity. And again, the right thing for us in our community is not touching the money, because once you start touching the money, many times it complicates things. And even though I am a 23-year financial advisor, and I'm most qualified to handle the money, it's important to be able to avoid distractions from throwing off the mission. So, yes, sir. The question was, how many homes on Johnson Street are vacant? There are many vacant, dilapidated homes on Jonathan Street. The other issue that they have is that over periods of time, developers or, aspiring entrepreneurs would come in and buy a lot, but never pay the property tax on it, because they were speculating, because the goal has been to gentrify this community, right? It has the lowest property values in the city. And the problem is us coming in, exploring its history has really stopped that process, because the community doesn't have the historic protections that the rest of the city has, but the highlighting this history and the fact that you're hearing about it and that it's a national story really slows that down and gives us more of an opportunity. So there are lots there. There are vacant lots that have been on a tax sale roll for 10 to 12 years. And the problem is now is that the tax liens are worth more than the property. So no one's going to buy them. They just come up year after year after year after year. So we have engaged the city and the county in developing a program for them to take them back and give them to organizations like ours to develop. Obviously, at the same time where I'm pointing out historically what they've done to this community, that conversation doesn't move very smoothly at times. But politicians need to be held accountable. Many times in our community, we think that we act as if we're beholden to them, as if they're superstars. No, they are not. They work for us. Amen. They work for us. There is no politician that I am starstruck by. I don't care if he has an R or a D next to their name. And the other thing that I will say is you have to be open to working with everyone. The power of our success is that I understood early on when I became a commissioner that Governor Hogan was going to put more investment in Western Maryland than previous governors. But that investment was not going to go into the black community unless there was someone standing up saying that we deserve it too. So I stood up and said we deserve it too. And I'm happy with what we've done thus far, but there's so much more in store. And as we kind of navigate the politics and we work through that, I feel like the momentum is going to grow within the community. The one thing that I have learned is that this Jonathan Street community has so many elders that are of vast educational experiences that have left the community, but they see what's going on now and they want to be involved. So we're piggybacking off of that, and we're building the capacity on these elders and those that have knowledge of, even more atrocious things that have happened in that community than we know right now, to help build the story and to build the next level of leaders that are going to lead this work. Yes.
So I have two questions, and I'll make it really short. The first is that I kept hearing you say that it's beneficial or advantageous that you not touch the money.
Yes.
To keep away racism. And I guess, I don't know, I'll just say that maybe that's because people have stolen, that say they've come to help us, money that's supposed to be for us. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out so you don't have to. But my question is, why is it that you can't be compensated in some way, even if not financially, for the work that you're doing? And for those of us that don't have the financial means to pay all of our bills and still do the work we love on behalf of our communities, does that mean that we're all supposed to volunteer? Because if not, then somehow we're corrupt or eventually going to be. And my second question is about the house. So you did all of that work to restore that cabin, and it went to a small white couple in Hagerstown? Or I guess when you were telling me about the trajectory of the story, I thought you were going to say, come and visit our museum to learn the history of John Street, or, we've got nice buttons you push where people talk about what used to happen here. And I'm like, wait, it's a house that was sold, and it's no longer even in ownership of the development corporation that you developed? So that was really confusing for me.
Yeah, so I'll cover that. And excellent catch, right? Because you're spot on. So again, our development corporation did not own the cabin. Preservation Maryland stepped in and bought the cabin, and they controlled the buying process. And yes, there is a white couple that is living in that house. That is not the ideal process of what we were looking for, but that was a kind of a part of the control that we gave up by not touching the money. Because the problem is that when you stand up an organization, the cost to operate it and get the funds to operate it are normally the biggest challenge. And for us as businessmen, we wanted to help the community, but we did not want to blur the lines. Because part of it is that as we started to build momentum, it was many African Americans, many of the have-nots, that were attacking us. And as a financial advisor of 23 years, I have a fiduciary responsibility that is far beyond any organization that I serve on. So, we received $250,000 in the budget that year. Professionally, I managed millions of dollars. So for me, I had to protect how I make my living. So in regards to you, in regards to what you do, no, if you're doing the work and this is what you do, yes, you should be. But for me, this is my extra, right? This was me taking my increase in what I've been blessed with and giving it into the community, because I'm in a position to do so. But back to your point in regards to the home not being a museum, one of the challenges is that cabin that you saw is only about 700 square feet. It had 200 square feet added onto it as kind of more living space, but it's a really small space. The doors were really narrow. I never went upstairs because my shoulders were too broad to go up those little tiny stairs. So it was unrealistic for it to become a museum, because you would have to destroy portions of the historical integrity of it to make it ADA accessible. So, and the other thing that kind of led to that as well is we truly feel that home ownership and entrepreneurship in that business will help it return to prominence, because that's where we saw it come from before. Ideally, we would have liked to seen a different vetting process in regards to whom lived in the home. But from my experience with our former chair, Dale Green, and his experience in the Hill community, I know that they're probably about 10 years ahead of what we're trying to do, where they've been revitalizing that community. And there's some cultural issues that we have too, because there weren't really many African Americans stepping forward. And I know in that community and homes that have been revitalized, I think The Latino population is taking advantage of what they have built out there more. The struggle is that in the Jonathan Street community, the majority of the homeowners are in one block. It's kind of the 400 block. As you kind of work your way back up, you have renters, you just have those that are not of means, and the homeowners that are left are elderly. Most of them are 70 and up. And the other thing that we're considering is these little incremental steps, even though not perfect, can still improve their property values. And when they pass on, now we've left something for that next generation that doesn't see as a burden that they leave behind and don't pay their property taxes on and becomes dilapidated, that they will take more pride in it because they see the changes and things coming into the community. So in a perfect world, we would have done things a lot differently. My ego says, who are you to tell me that I can't manage this little bit of money with what I do for a living? But I knew to move the mission forward, I had to put my ego aside. And see, the thing is, our organization is not, we didn't make it a nonprofit because of the cost associated with it, all of the things that you have to do to maintain a nonprofit charter notes. We didn't make it a nonprofit. We kept it a for-profit because at some point, we would like to pool our money and invest with the community. No. We have used the CDC as an advocacy vehicle, so that people can stop saying the two names of the co-founders, right? And that's all we've done is advocated. Now, the governor wrote us into a supplemental budget as the Western Maryland CDC for the money that we received for the Robert W. Johnson Community Center. However, we have been able to complete the paperwork so the money goes directly to the center. So we can continue to go around the state and be the advocate. And whether we work with Preservation Maryland or the United Way or the Community Foundation, there are other nonprofits that can be a fiscal sponsor for you even when you are not. So there are ways around starting a nonprofit. One of the problems in our community, we have too many nonprofits. Everyone has an idea they want to go start a nonprofit, as opposed to partnering and working together and coalescing around one mission. And the one thing that does is it has the same organizations fighting over the same pool of dollars to run their organization. And it gets ugly amongst them. So we've been able to avoid that at this point. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry,
Sure.
because you're trying to ensure that no one sees you all as trying to capitalize.
Yes.
So you are a for-profit, which means you can capitalize on it.
Yes.
Because if you were a nonprofit, it would be managed by a group
Yes.
who would ensure that it is actually for the good of the community. So I'm kind of torn now. I was listening to your story and I was following. I was like, hey, wait, you said we're not a nonprofit. And, for nonprofits, there's a reason that it's in there because it protects what you are trying to build.
Yes.
As a for-profit, you guys can come in and redevelop it and put some nice big homes and tear it up, whatever, and no one can do anything. So I don't understand how you can say we're here for the community, but at the same time, we are a for-profit. Because I know I do good, I applaud you for what you do, for your real job and everything else. But if I was a nigger nanny, I'm gonna sit back here and say, oh, that brother knows how to make some money. People like this.
That's one of the issues in our community. It's not a curse that I know how to make money because I'm trying to teach my community how to make money. Because what we came here starting with is the wealth gap. And one of the issues that we have in our community is our relationship with money and how we see the process. For us, we haven't touched anybody's money. The only money that's being used is the money that we pour in to community. And that's what has worked for us. We have left the option open to start a nonprofit, but at this point, all we are is a shell. We're an advocacy vehicle. And that's all we do. We advocate for the community. We advocate for the historic community center. We advocated for this home. And there are other historic structures that we're advocating for. Now, selfishly, would we like to buy one of those vacant lots at some point and build alongside of the community? Yes, because that's what our ancestors did. Being for-profit is not bad. The way that we get ourselves out of where we are is to build and build together. So we leave ourselves that option. And I understand that everything's not for everybody. And I understand that not being from that community brings scrutiny. But I've always been taught you can always check my receipts. You can check my pockets, you can see my checkbook, and you can see where my heart is. And that's the best that I can do, because the other thing we figured out is we won't please everybody in this journey. Again, like I said, I've been in that community for 30 years, and I still haven't been adopted yet. But you know them by their fruits. And the fruits of what we're doing for that community of $2.5 million of investment that's come in, and no one has touched a dime, and there's been no administrative fees. It hasn't been done there before. And again, we live in a community that has too many nonprofits. There's over 700 nonprofits in Hagerstown. So we foster collaborations and partnerships. We stand in the gap with just our umbrella. We use fiscal sponsors of organizations that have been around 80, 90 years that have the dollars to pay for the legal staff and the accounting and all of those things that you need to bring in the type of funding that we're talking about. So it reduces legal liability. It allows us to be efficient. But at the end of the day, it streamlined getting the resources to the community. But as I've said before, the other side of it is, do I want to be a part of this growth with community? Yes, I want to practice what I preach. I believe in us building wealth as a people. I believe in us closing the gap between the have and the have-nots, because I know that I have seen the impact of my own family and others. So that's the model that we move within. And say, yes.
There are a lot out there, and they seem to be doing very well. And another thing is you have the wherewithal to play the money game. Most people do not. So a nonprofit will build their way in to ensuring that they can do what you're doing. So for you to say, well, we don't need a nonprofit, you do, because if nothing else, a nonprofit also governs how that money is spent in governance group. Because we is there, as you said yourself, we have our people that are proud to but and whatever else. A nonprofit would ensure that the money that is received is being spent to do what it's supposed to do. But if people coming like you will say, well, I'm coming as a CDC and I'm not a nonprofit, that's what gentrification is, the way I look at it.
And maybe this is something that I didn't clearly articulate. The $2.5 million that has been raised is going directly to nonprofits. We're simply advocating on their behalf. So the five of us that have formed the CDC, we serve on this commission and other state commissions. So we advocate around the state because we have the access that many in the community does not have. So the money is going directly to nonprofits, and they have to go through their process in regards to oversight. We're simply advocating on their behalf in that community. You know, Preservation Maryland, when they came in and worked on they are a nonprofit. The Robert W. Johnson Community Center that's receiving over $1 million for renovations, they are a nonprofit. So at some point we very well may moving to a nonprofit, but then that means that I'm going to have to give up some of the other things I serve on, because obviously nonprofits take a lot of work to maintain. But at this point, we've been successful just being an advocate. And being an advocate, we needed to stand under the umbrella of an organization as opposed to the two individuals that kind of started the mission. So that's how we've kind of chosen to move. And we'll see what's next. I mean, right now, my advocacy is for that community center and getting that rebuilt. Maybe it'll be my time to take a break. But if anything, when that community center is redone, guess who's going to be the first person signing up to teach financial literacy to children and adults? So our path is untraditional, but so is our community. And it's different than many other places in the state. But thank you for challenging me in your feedback, because I appreciate it. So one of the things that happened is the 90-plus-year-old owner, the only condition he had when he sold it was that it would be named the Richard O. Davis Homestead. So there is a plaque right on the front of the home that's marking that. Pictures of the home have been submitted to the Smithsonian. So there have been some things that have been done there to kind of protect it from a historical standpoint. And also, in the selling of the home, Preservation Maryland worked in regards to, it can't be a rental, it can't be, it has to be owned. It has to be a primary residence for someone in the community. So there has been some easements put on that to protect it, while the broader community still doesn't have protections at this point. But we have had conversations in regards to it becoming a conservation district. Because part of the problem is that if it becomes a historic district and it has to meet those type of guidelines, the African Americans in the community don't have the money for the improvements to be able to do that. So we're kind of working through what that can look like, while we're also trying to drive more resources to the community. And I'll just give you a highlight of one of the things that we're working on. One of the things that we have on Governor Hogan's desk is a pilot program for us. We have a community bank that's willing to put up $500,000 for low interest rate loans to homeowners in the community. We're looking for Governor Hogan to match it in this last budget of his, so that we have $1 million in that community for homeowners to get low interest rate loans to do rehab of their community. Because what we found is a lot of the elderly homeowners or those that are approaching retirement are the working poor. They don't have the income that they could go into the bank and get a traditional loan. So that's one of those barriers to improving their property. And that's one of those barriers that when they pass on, then they've left their family a burden more so than something that is there that is an appreciating asset. So one of the ways we're trying to address that is having a pilot program where a community bank is putting in $500,000. We're looking for the state to put in $500,000 to help those, especially in the 400 block where it's the heaviest part of home ownership, to have very low interest rate loans to be able to rehab their properties. And considering the fact that, interest rates have went up over 300 basis points this year, that will be very powerful for those homeowners that are there. Yes, ma'am. Since I've been on the commission, I have had more conversations with his staff, more so than Governor Hogan. Normally when I see Governor Hogan, it's an event like this or something of the commission, And normally I get about 2 or 3 minutes to say something and put it on his radar, right? That's all I get. And one of his senior aides always, every time we would be in a room, he would, let me introduce you to Governor Hogan. I'm like, I've met Governor Hogan. He was like, Reggie, you don't understand. I'm carving out 2 to 3 minutes because he's gonna take pictures with everyone in this room and everyone's gonna be vying for his attention. I'm carving you out 2 to 3 minutes. So make sure you have something to thank him for, something to ask, or something to move forward in your community. So one of the experiences that I had, I'm a recent graduate of Leadership Maryland. So our class was having a reception and Governor Hogan was gonna be there. Oh, Governor Hogan's gonna be there? We got the deck ready? You know, I'm talking to the guys. I'm gonna see Governor Hogan. I'm gonna get my 3 minutes. Now this is at the end of the legislative session. And understanding how the budget works, you have the general budget, you have bond bills that you have access to, then you have the supplemental budget, and then you have money that you can get through the Department of Housing and Community Development. We have worked all of those angles. But when I got my 2 or 3 minutes, Governor Hogan, nice to see you again. Thank you for your investment in this cabin project. I'm sure you've seen how it's become a national story. Thank you for investing in that black community. Governor Hogan, there's a proposal I would like to put on your desk for your supplemental budget for you. He turns to his aide hands me the card and says, hey, get this to me as soon as you can. I says, I'll have it to you in 24 hours. So we sent the proposal and the business plan that we had wrote up. We knew it was last minute. We knew it was an offhanded ask, but there's a $7 billion surplus in the state. And there was nobody in our community, not our city, not our county, nobody else was advocating for that black community with that much money of a surplus. So we took a leap of faith and we just asked for it. Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what was the rationale on Governor Hogan or his aide, whoever was the decision maker, what was the rationale or the rationale was given for why, and not to be expected to give you full $10 million, but to give someone $400,000 asking, knowing that the community has needs. I'm just wondering what the rationale was, or even if there was something that said, listen, hey, you know, whatever reasons we're doing this now, but come back next year with your full proposal again. Like, did that happen? Because I think one of the things that becomes discouraging for black people, not just in Hampton County, but all over, particularly all over Maryland, because Maryland does not suffer from not having money. So let's be real clear about that.
Amen.
Maryland has a lot of money, and Maryland has a lot of money because it has made a lot of money off black people. So let's be really clear about that. So I'm just trying to understand, especially if we are wanting or are encouraged to continue to try to have these relationships at different levels with government, you know, our nonprofits, you know, or whatever our entities are, and then we present to them our needs, and then they look at us and say, okay, cool, and then they give us something and we're like, okay, well, that is like this.
Right. You know, after that, I have not had conversations directly with Governor Hogan. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I mean, we made this ask probably about 3 days before the supplemental budget came out. So to even get anything, we were happy with, right? Because it was a former state senator says, Reggie, you guys have momentum in regards to this cabin project. You need to go ask for more money and ask for, you know, ask for your full proposal. Don't shortchange yourself. Don't ask for a little, ask for a lot. But after that though, and talking with the senior staff and other legislators, again, we're back at the table this year and we're going through all the pools of the money. See, the difference in regards to kind of how we moved along, when we got to $250,000 for the cabin, that was my former state senator calling me in hours before the session was ending, when horse trading is going on, saying, I think I can get you some money. Do you have a project ready to go? Yes, we do. Where's the money supposed to go? Send it to Preservation Maryland. 11 o'clock at night, I'm calling the executive director of Preservation Maryland. We're gonna get $250,000 in the budget. I said you're gonna be the fiscal sponsor. Is that good? Yep, all right, perfect. Senator Serafini, yes, please get us that money. That kicked it off. The next year, the community center was receiving some bond bills. Then this past session, we got $400,000 in the supplemental budget. This year, our ask is in the general budget. And we're working with the Department of Housing and Community Development. So it's been piecemeal. It hasn't been easy. We've just been working the process and learning it as we go and continuing to ask and building more advocates in Annapolis as we go. So did I think that we were going to get to 10 million when we asked in the final days of session? No. Did I think we were going to get 400,000? I really didn't know. But I knew we had momentum from what we were able to create out of the cabin project. And that 400,000 is going to the community center. And the beauty of that is that, again, I told you that community center was built in 1888 and the back part was built in 1924. The building is failing. But the blessing of that 400,000 is that we're going to be able to address the roof. You know, we're lucky that hurricane season hasn't been really tough on us here. But every time that there's a storm, that building floods and there's issues. And you know, when a building starts failing, it snowballs. So that 400,000 is going to help us plug the gap until we are able to get that other $1 million to work. So I would just say, once you get your foot in the door, you just keep working at it. You keep building relationship. You keep asking. When we first started, I didn't understand that the governor's budget is worked on during the summer. I would go down to Annapolis in January and start advocating. Many times that is too late. If you're going to Annapolis in January and February, you're getting scraps. The hard work is done in the summertime when your legislators are home and these ideas are being crafted. And the growth in regards to what we're doing is we've learned that over time. So coming into this summer, we were ready. We were sitting down with our legislators. We were bringing bank presidents in and having this conversation about that. And the ideal of working with bank presidents, if many of you are not familiar, they have to deal with the Community Reinvestment Act, where there are certain investments that they need to make in low and moderate income communities. So we're bringing them a ready-made solution. And a lot of my banking career I spent in a bank, and many banks will do things to fulfill that requirement that has no bearing on community. So for instance, I work for a very large bank, and in one community in Allegheny County, further past Washington County, how they met their commitment was they bought a CD in a local credit union because it was in a low or moderate income community. That was how they were fulfilling their requirement. You know, there are certain educational things that they're supposed to be doing in our communities that they aren't doing. But when you can bring to them a ready-made solution of, you know, from their standpoint, you're saying I can have more borrowers from your community and I can fulfill this requirement. It's a win-win. And then along with that, we want to make sure that residents that take advantage of the program, if we're successful, receive the financial literacy that goes along with it. Because if we think about the last recession and downturn, it was many of us that lost our homes because of the predatory lending and those type of things. So all of these things go hand in hand. I think I exhausted everybody. Thank you.